Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of What's the Tea here at South Suburban Family Shelter. My name is Celeste, for those who have or have not seen me. And then I also have.
I'm Lysandra Hutchinson.
So today we're going to have a really unique episode. But before that, I do want to thank you all for watching. Please share our video, comment, like our video so that we can get more people watching. Warm up some tea and drink some tea while you're listening to this really good conversation here. And also join us every Tuesday at 2 p.m. for an episode of What's the Tea? So what we're going to talk about today, we'll talk about cultural humility, which is actually pretty interesting to both Lysandra and I, because it's a topic that we teach in our 40-hour domestic violence training that we offer here at South Suburban Family Shelter. And so this is a topic that we've both taught and we both think is very interesting and very just good to know about. So I will go ahead and start off by just defining cultural humility. What is cultural humility? So the National Institute of Health defines cultural humility as a lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique, whereby the individual not only learns about other cultures, but starts examining his or her own beliefs and cultural identities. So this is something that I find super interesting, because cultural humility is not saying that, that I'm culturally competent and that I know it all. It's exactly the complete opposite. It's a lifelong learning. So it's not to say that you'll ever get there, but you're just, keeping an open mind to other people's cultures, to becoming educated on how other people live their lives and everybody's different cultural backgrounds and what make up who they are. So for the purpose of this episode, I actually did wear my shirt that represents my culture, I feel like. So I got this shirt in Mexico this summer, and it's a traditional Mexican shirt that, is used a lot in Mexico.
I love that, Celeste. Like, I want one. It's really pretty. Super pretty.
You'll have to remind me next time.
I have to put my order in.
Although I'm sure they sell them out here too. So let's go ahead and dig a little bit deeper into cultural humility. And I'll go ahead and ask you, Lysandra, what is culture and why is it important?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to actually read you guys the definition of culture just so that you understand what culture is. It's a word that we use all the time, but we don't necessarily talk a lot about the definition. And different people have different perspectives on what it means. So for our purposes today, culture is the characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people, encompassing language, religion, cuisine, social habits, music, and arts. Thus, it can be seen as the growth of group identity fostered by social patterns unique to the group. So culture encompasses so many different things about us as individuals, and it has a lot to do with where we grew up. It has a lot to do with our ethnicity, our norms, our families. Different families have cultures. Cities have cultures, states have cultures, countries have cultures, and they vary, different ethnic groups, different religious groups, even institutions have cultures. Every workplace has a culture. So culture is pretty powerful, and it's important because it's how we move through the world, and it's how we see the world. It also dictates a lot of our expectations of how things should be, how people should act, because it's based on what's normal to us. Our expectations and how we work together, how we impact each other, how we impact society, and how we're impacted. So it's a really huge part of our identity as people. So it's really important.
Yeah. I think, you kind of summarize how it's just a really huge umbrella. Like culture can really be so many different things.
Yep.
So like you said, a lot of people define it differently, but I feel like you can define it differently. What culture is to you is what it is to you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So then let's dive a little deeper into why is it important? Like, why is it important to know your culture? Why is culture important?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that we can start off just by explaining how, culture is just a diverse dimensions of what define who you are. And understanding yourself is the very first step to being culturally humble, is understanding yourself, understanding your own culture. And that's really the first step to understanding others as well, and having that empathy towards them and understanding other people's cultures and the way they do things.
Yeah, no, I love how you use the word empathy, because I think that in cultural humility, having empathy is huge too, because you understand um, more about motives, and you understand the context within, like, you understand another person's context. If you can not only understand your culture, but also take that extra step to understand someone else's culture, it gives you a lot of insight. It allows for you to be more patient. It allows for you to see how you can make connections and build partnerships and collaborate, and just and work in a way that is just more efficient, and I think more that's inclusive, So I think that that's why it's also important for you not to only understand your own culture, but the culture of other people. Definitely.
Yeah, and along with that, I think this kind of takes us to our next topic here of, how can we recognize our own biases? And I think it's really important to study and learn about our own culture and learn about ourselves in general to recognize our own biases, because everyone has some form of implicit or unconscious bias that we absorb. It could be from a very young age. So whether it's about race, about class, about gender, ethnicity, anything else, anything of that sort. So implicit bias shows up very deep down, and deep down prejudices and stereotypical assumptions that we don't know we hold. And it's important to just learn about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important for us to kind of own that we each have some kind of biases. We each
Exactly.
have biases. And I think that we see the world through that lens. The biases that we have cause us to see other people's actions in a certain way. Um, I think maybe like giving some examples of that. If I have a bias toward the elderly, right? Maybe I just hypothetically think that elderly people are bossy, right? And let's just say that's my bias based on my background. Then I may interpret someone that is elderly, maybe giving instructions somewhere, as coming off as bossy, because that's my bias, that's my lens, even if that's not true. But just because I have a bias, I see it that way, I perceived it that way. Maybe they were acting in their rightful authority, maybe they were just being firm, but in a way that was kind, but I've interpreted it as bossy.
Exactly. Or maybe you had an experience, in your childhood or growing up where you had someone who, being bossy towards you. And so, a lot of people, this is what it is that they had an experience where they did have, either a bad experience or just something that caused them to judge all of these people in the same manner. So it could have
Yeah,
also been that.
100%. Or maybe I have not interacted with enough people from a different culture or community, and I only understand them. So I'm ignorant. I'm ignorant of how they are, what their culture is, how they talk, how they communicate. Like, my mom is Italian, and they say Italian people can speak in a very aggressive manner, toward each other. So, but that's the culture, and maybe it has nothing to do with being aggressive, but it's just in the culture how they speak. And I could misunderstand that if I'm ignorant of the culture, or if a lot of stereotypes have been used in the media to portray a particular culture. I may have a bias based on that, because I don't have my own firsthand experiences, but my ideas and my biases have been cultivated through movies or songs or videos or the news.
Definitely. So it's really important to just, get educated. Don't believe everything that you hear.
Yeah.
And also, surround yourself with a diverse, set like social groups and, diverse people interact with, people of all cultures, because that's really, I feel like that's really the best way to learn. You can't open a book and read about a certain culture and say that you know it all. You've learned all about what it's like to be a certain culture. That's impossible, because even people from one culture, every single individual, it's different. Their culture is different no matter where they come from.
Yeah, I mean, I like that you're making that point, because that's what we've talked about in the 40 hour, is that you can't necessarily be culturally competent, meaning that you have fully understood everyone's culture, but you can practice cultural humility, meaning that you're remaining open, you're remaining humble, you're remaining introspective about your biases, about yourself, and how you see and perceive other people. And you can remain open to collecting that new data, coming into new understandings, because also things change. Cultures can change. And we were talking about that too. We were talking about cancel culture earlier, and how in the US, especially this year and last year, there's been this big phenomenon of having a cancel culture, where if a celebrity or someone in the news or on television or movies says or does something that people disagree with or find to be socially unacceptable, the whole culture will try to cancel them and go on basically a smear campaign via social media to shame them or criticize them. And now that's become a part of the culture. It's like we have a cancel culture. So things evolve, things change. And one of the ways that impacts everyone is a lot more careful about what they're saying, because they know there is a pretty, I guess, like merciless cancel culture. So
yeah, that reminds me, and it takes me to this ladder of inference that I wanted to show. So I'm going to go ahead and try and share my screen here. So here it is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So here it is. We have the ladder of inference. This is one of the images that we do use on our 40-hour training. And I think that is really, it really explains a lot, and it kind of just puts it into perspective. It gets, a visual picture. A lot of us are visual learners. So it helps me understand, this process. So this ladder of inference, it describes how people form and sustain mental models. So mental model is kind of like these glasses that you have that critically changes the way that you see the world around you. So we do all make assumptions, they're all necessary, making assumptions, but it's important that we acknowledge that these assumptions could be wrong, especially when we're making assumptions about the intentions or the beliefs of others. So this is kind of like what's going through your head, I would say, in an experience, that might change the way you view things after this. And what I think is interesting is that, more than one person can have this very same exact experience, but they're not going to take it in the same way because of the things they've been through and their experiences and their culture, background, and just because of their beliefs, So you start at the bottom here on the ladder, and it starts off where I experience and I observe. So I experience and I observe data as a video camera captures data. So you hear the words, you observe body language, and collect the information. So then after that, I select data that I feel is relevant, and I discard data that seems irrelevant. So that's where you start, using your very own biases and your own ideas and judgments. What do I think is important? Then that's when I add meaning. So based on what I feel is reasonable, according to the data I selected, you add meaning to this. So kind of like your explanation of like, if I think that the elderly are bossy, okay, so maybe you had an experience where there was, one person who was bossy to you. Now you're adding meaning to them. And now you're adding a meaning to this, and you might be making assumptions as well. So I make assumptions that my data and meanings are accurate and that they represent the reality. So this is kind of where you have to catch yourself and ask yourself some questions when you notice that you're doing this, because we all do this. So you got to kind of ask yourself some questions, is this accurate?
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, often I draw conclusions. So based on my assumptions and based on what's best for me and those that I care for. So you're actually thinking about what's best for you when you're drawing these conclusions. And I feel like that's why it's important to kind of have that advocate perspective and try and think about, those power imbalances and how we can help everyone instead of, So then I adopt beliefs. So based on my conclusion, as if everyone has the same conclusions and beliefs. And then finally, I act. I act based on my beliefs as if they were proven facts, and I adjust new data to fit my beliefs. So that's where prejudice comes in. That's where stereotypes and discrimination comes in, is where, you've gone up all the way up this ladder, and then finally you act in a way that where you believe that, these experiences and your assumptions are actually true.
Right.
And once you get here, it's very important to, to think twice and to be open-minded, to be culturally humble.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll leave that up there for 1 second, but let's talk about how we can also, how can we recognize our own biases? What are some tips that you would say, what can we do to actually help us recognize our own biases? For me, go ahead.
I was just going to say that we talk about privilege in the 40 hour, and we ask the question when we're looking at the ladder of inference. You have to ask yourself, do I have a level of privilege that could impact how I experience each level of the ladder of inference? Meaning that if you are in a society where there's not a lot of racism toward your ethnic group, or sexism toward your particular gender identity, then you have a certain level of privilege that other people that are from more oppressed groups don't have. And so you have to try to process your level of yourself on the ladder of inference to ask yourself, could my privilege possibly be blinding me to nuances and context and experiences that other people are having that I either haven't experienced or am not privy to, because I am from a place of privilege. I'm operating from a place of privilege. And I think that that's an important one. Or even, we all have some level of, privilege, even if you are just whatever the group is. If you're
like the majority group, maybe.
Yeah, the majority group. If you're a part of the majority group, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of folks, I think, have a hard time understanding, is that we do all have, some part of us is something like privileged. I've actually had, conversations with people where they say, I had it hard. I had to work for my money, and I had to, we're not saying that you had it completely easy and everything was easy for you. And privilege is not always a bad thing.
Yeah.
A lot of people connect privilege with being something that's negative. It's definitely not negative. It can be used in so many positive ways, using your privilege to, to spread the word about something. But yeah, so we all have our own privilege, whether we're able-bodied, a lot of people are in wheelchairs. Are you on a wheelchair? So you're privileged.
Right.
And that's people, and sometimes we don't recognize those types of things.
That's so true. That's so true. And often we're blinded to the different challenges that people have that are not privileged, that are not, enjoying the privilege that we have.
Exactly. So there's so much that we can do for these people.
Yeah.
Okay, so how can a lack of cultural humility actually lead to prejudice?
to define prejudice for us today. We're going to use the definition that we use in our 40 hour to just explain what exactly prejudice is. And prejudice is a conscious or unconscious negative belief about a whole group of people and its individual members when the person holding the prejudice also has and uses the power to deny opportunities, resources, or access to a person because of their group membership, there is discrimination. So you can have a prejudice against any group. And it's basically a negative belief. It's either at a conscious level or it's at an unconscious level, but it's there. And it's something negative that you've classified, not just one person, but just this whole group of people. You see them in this negative way, or you believe this unfavorable, negative thing about them. So in terms of having a lack of cultural humility, really, I think it leads to prejudice pretty easy. Like that's a pretty easy street, so kind of that's pretty much like, I think, a snowball, because if you have all of these biases and you're not practicing cultural humility, so you're not self-aware and you're not actively trying to learn and collect new data about different people, I think 9 times out of 10, it would be very likely that you would hold some level of prejudice in your subconscious or conscious level.
Exactly, whether you know it or not.
Yeah.
If you're not open to, learning about other cultures and, opening up your mind to the fact that your own assumptions could be wrong, it's definitely going to lead to prejudice, like you said. I agree.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
So there are so many ways that cultural humility can actually help us support clients. So I'll go ahead and start us off on that tangent there. But so it's really important, while you're working with clients or, wherever you are, to be culturally humble. Before we can help others, we must take the time to understand ourselves and where we came from and what makes us we are. So it's important for us to be aware of our own biases, like you just said, our judgments, or the way that we view the world. And then we can put those thoughts aside, if they hinder our ability to work with people and the helping process. So it's important to be able to learn how to do that. And that's where cultural humility comes along when you're working with clients. That's actually a way that you can build rapport. And I know when we're working in DV situations, we like to say that, our client or whoever it is we're working with, they are on the driver's seat. Mm-hmm. So can we really be allowing them to make their own decisions when we're already assuming, that we know everything about them?
Yeah. 100%. I think in domestic violence, we often hear and talk about different issues in how culture perceives domestic violence, and some of the barriers to those that have been victims face when it comes to either seeking an order of protection or the things that may cause them not to want to call the police. Because different cultures have a lot of different perceptions and ideas about domestic violence. So, for example, I think it was a training I was in where there was a person talking about those in the Muslim culture really have a lot of kind of like shame when it comes to calling the police if they're experiencing domestic violence in the home. Or if you are in African American culture, there can be a lot of fear to calling the police because of just historical racism and the use of police brutality against certain minority groups. So if we're working in DV, it's important for us to really be knowledgeable about our own biases, as well as the different impacts of these different cultural nuances on different groups. And so we can seek how we can best support them.
Yeah, I like that response, Sandra. So like you're saying, everybody has their own unique experiences, and, cultural humility really does help you figure out what those unique experiences are, as opposed to, thinking that you already know what these people have been through just because they're in a DV situation. Every single DV situation is different. So I keep stressing the importance of, just keeping your mind open, especially when working with clients. It'll help with that trust and rapport, especially. So that's really important.
Yeah, I think this also kind of speaks to why it's important for us as DV advocates to continue to go to trainings on these topics and stay very fresh and relevant about what is happening in different communities and how we can best support different cultures and different communities. I think it's important too for us to slow down and really ask questions, because we may think we know a thing and find out that if we had more context and understanding of a culture, we would approach it differently, or that maybe there's some barriers or some beliefs that are held or some practices or traditions that we haven't considered. It's just really powerful. I think it's good data, it's good information to have and to be armed with when doing this work.
Definitely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So I believe that about sums up our outline here. Are there any last words that you want to provide, Sandra?
I would just say cultural humility, just to stress again that it's lifelong.
Yes,
definitely. It's almost taking a sort of heart posture toward how you want to move through the world. And it's kind of making a decision to stay open and to stay flexible in your beliefs and allowing your assumptions to be challenged. And I just think that takes a lot of intentionality, but is really important. So I feel like that's kind of the essence of cultural humility. That's how I see it.
Exactly. Yeah, it is very intentional. And to challenge yourself can be hard, to do it on your own. And I know something that I did in the past, and I think it's really fun to do, is to learn about yourself. There's online tests where you can take like a project implicit test online. Yeah, and so these are really interesting. So there's a implicit association test from Harvard, and it's one of the best known tools for getting implicit bias out in the open. So I think it's also important to say that these implicit biases, they can be unlearned once they're recognized. Okay. So it's important to just point out that you might have all these, biases and, ways that you live your life that you might learn, that wasn't the right way. This whole time I've been thinking that it was that way, but it isn't. There's always, as long as you recognize them, you can always change them.
I think that's so good too, because when it comes to implicit bias, if we grew up in a home or household, or we were connected to family members and they held certain beliefs that they passed down to us, but we really maybe we held those people dear in our heart, or we thought, well, they know, and they've passed these things down. They're implicit, they're very ingrained and embedded. And maybe we've never thought to question some of the ways that those people may have seen other groups that are really not relevant and are not really serving us. So I just think that that's really real. It's really important, definitely. That's a great resource to have.
Yeah, and I'm sure it happens is something really common. Okay. So we'll go ahead and leave it at that. Thank you all for watching us. Feel free to comment. Feel free to ask any questions. We'll definitely get those questions answered for you. And also share this video, like this video, all the things, comment on here. And we will be with you again next Tuesday at 2 p.m. So every Tuesday at 2 at same place, same time, different tea.
Thanks, Celeste. Bye.
No problem. Bye, everyone.